You don't need to do anything right now. You don't need to go anywhere or remember anything or hold on to any thought that's been following you through the day. Whatever that thought is, and there may be more than one, you can simply allow it to soften the way a sound softens when you move a little further from its source. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes quieter and quieter still. Find the position that feels most like rest. If your shoulders are carrying something, let them lower. If your jaw is holding, let it go. Notice the weight of your body, the way it presses into whatever surface is beneath you, the way that surface presses back, steady and unhurried and reliable. You are supported. You have always been supported in this moment right here. Take one slow breath in through your nose. Hold it gently, not with effort, just with ease. And let it out through your mouth as slowly as you are able until the very last of it has gone. Again, in through the nose, long and soft, and out, all the way out, until there is nothing left to release. The world you are about to enter exists very high above the ground, higher than the noise of roads, higher than the smell of the ordinary day. The air there is cool and clean and carries the faint mineral taste of altitude, something like stone, something like distance, something like the memory of rain. There are plants there that hum. There are walkways of old rope and warm wood that sway just slightly when you step onto them, just slightly, just enough to remind you that you are held. You are a cultivator. This is your evening round. There is nothing urgent here. There has never been anything urgent here. Let your eyes close if they haven't already. And step, slowly, gently, with no particular hurry, into the canopy. And the first thing you notice is the air. It comes to you before anything else, before the light, before the sound, before the shapes of things resolve themselves into something recognizable. The air arrives first, the way it always does at this height, carrying itself against your face with a kind of patient insistence. It is cool, not cold, not the cold that tightens the skin or catches the breath, but cool in the way that a glass of water is cool when you hold it in both hands on a warm afternoon. Cool enough to notice, cool enough to be grateful for. You breathe it in, and there is the smell of moss, a deep, green, living smell, something between earth and water, something that has never been entirely one thing or the other, and beneath it, threading through it like a current beneath the surface of a slow river, the smell of cedar resin, warm and woody and ancient. The cedar planks of the walkways have been absorbing the day's last heat, and now, as the air cools around them, they release it, slowly, gradually, the way all good things release what they have been holding. You have smelled this smell so many evenings now that it has become a kind of signal to your body. A signal that says, the day is ending, the work is gentle, you are here. You are standing at the entry platform, the broad octagonal deck of weathered wood that serves as the beginning of everything up here. The planks beneath your feet are warm and slightly rough, the grain worn smooth in the center where feet have walked for many years, but textured at the edges where the wood has aged and lifted just slightly from the frame. You know this platform by feel. You know where each plank meets the next, where the grain runs long and where it turns. Your feet find the familiar path without needing to be told. The light is amber. All along the railings of the platform and strung between the nearest branches of the great trees that hold this whole network aloft, there are lantern pods, living things, oval and smooth, the size of a closed fist, that glow from within with a warm bioluminescent light. The light they give is not bright. It was never meant to be bright. It is the light of last things, last warmth, last wakefulness, the gentle amber that comes just before a candle is asked to stop. It falls across the wooden planks in soft, overlapping circles, each one slightly different from the next, because each lantern pod pulses with its own quiet rhythm, its own slow breath of light. Together they make a warmth that is more than the sum of their parts. And together they make the canopy feel like somewhere that has been loved for a very long time. And then there is the sound. It comes from below you and above you and from every direction at once, not loudly, never loudly, but pervasively, the way the sound of the sea is pervasive when you are near enough to hear it. It is a hum, a single, low, continuous note that seems to come from the wood of the walkways and the fiber of the ropes and the very air itself. This is the sound tree. You cannot see it from here. It is further along the network, deeper in, older than any measurement anyone has thought to take. But its hum travels through everything that is connected to it, and everything up here is connected to it. The ropes that hold the walkways are threaded through its outer branches. The planks were cut from trees that grew in its shadow. And so its note, that one low, steady, unvarying note, is always present, always beneath everything, like the sound of your own heartbeat, which you do not usually notice, but which is always there, patient and reliable, keeping the rhythm of you. You stand for a moment at the entry platform and simply listen. The hum of the sound tree, the soft clicking of bell moss somewhere nearby, a small rhythmic sound like the ticking of a clock that has decided not to rush. The creak of the first walkway as it moves very slightly in the evening air, its ropes settling, its planks adjusting, the whole structure breathing with the small movements of the upper canopy. And further away, barely perceptible, the wind moving through the highest branches, a long, slow exhale, as if the forest itself is breathing out after a full day of holding. You pick up your misting can from its hook beside the entry post. It is made of copper, old copper, the kind that has gone the color of a winter sea, green and gray and faintly luminous. The handle is worn smooth where your hand has held it, and it fits your grip the way a thing fits when it has been shaped by use. The water inside it makes a soft, barely audible sound when you move, a small liquid settling. You carry it easily. The first walkway extends from the entry platform toward the northeast, toward the fragrance garden, which is always where you begin. It is a rope and plank bridge, perhaps 30 steps long, wide enough for one person to walk with ease and two to pass with care. The ropes along the sides are thick and braided, the color of old honey, and they have been there long enough that small organisms have made their home in the fibers, pale gray lichens, tiny cushions of moss, occasional clusters of something you have never bothered to name but which smell, when the air is right, faintly of almonds. You step onto the walkway and it responds, not dramatically, not enough to unsteady you, but perceptibly. It sways. Just a small pendulum movement, a gentle arc of a few inches in each direction, and then it settles, and then it sways again as your next step shifts the weight. You have walked this walkway so many times that your body has learned to move with it rather than against it, a slight yielding in the knees, a small give in the hips, a way of carrying your weight that accommodates the sway rather than resisting it. It is, you have always thought, a useful thing to have learned. The yielding, the accommodation. Beneath the walkway, the forest floor is very far away. You can see it if you look, and sometimes you do, though not tonight, not yet, as a kind of deep green darkness, a place where the light has been absorbed and transformed into something else entirely. But you do not look down tonight. Tonight you look ahead toward the amber glow of the fragrance garden's lantern pods, toward the shapes of the broad-leafed plants that are already beginning to exhale their evening scent. The walkway sways, the hum of the sound tree moves through the soles of your feet. The cedar smell rises from the warm planks, and you walk slowly, with no particular hurry, toward the first of your plants. The fragrance garden is the warmest of the platforms. It faces west, and in the afternoons it catches the full weight of the descending sun, not directly, because the canopy above diffuses everything, but enough that the wood of its decking has absorbed more heat than any other platform, and releases it more slowly, so that even now, in the cooling evening, there is a gentle warmth underfoot that is almost like walking across a sun-warmed stone. The platform is roughly circular, perhaps 12 paces across, and every inch of its railing is lined with clay pots of varying sizes, wide, shallow dishes for the ground-spreading varieties, tall, narrow cylinders for the ones that grow in columns, and a series of hanging baskets suspended from the branch overhead that hold the smallest, most delicate plants, the ones that need the most air around them, the ones that would suffocate in soil. They sway very slightly in the evening air, those hanging baskets turning on their own slow axes, as if considering. The plants in the fragrance garden are a particular kind of sound plant, one whose primary function is not to hum, but to breathe. They have large waxy leaves, broad and smooth on their upper surfaces and finely textured beneath, like the underside of a mushroom. During the day, they absorb the ambient sounds of the canopy, the wind, the distant calls of birds, the creak of the walkways, the hum of the sound tree, and they process these sounds slowly, transforming them through some chemistry you have never fully understood but have always deeply respected. And in the evening, as the temperature drops and the light fades, they release what they have gathered, not as sound exactly, but as scent, as fragrance. The smell that rises from the fragrance garden in the evening is impossible to describe with any single word. It is the smell of distant rain, the particular freshness of water falling on dry ground far away, carried to you on a wind that has traveled a long distance to arrive. It is also the smell of something older, of stone that has been in sunlight for centuries, of wood that has been slowly breathing for decades. And beneath all of that, something mineral and faint, the altitude itself, the thinness of the air at this height, which has its own smell, like the smell of a clear winter sky. You step onto the fragrance garden platform, and the warmth of the decking comes up through your feet immediately. You pause. You breathe. The plants nearest the railing are the low-drone ferns, the ones whose leaves, when misted, release a soft vibration that is less a sound than a feeling, something you perceive in your chest rather than your ears. They are wide and deeply green, their surfaces waxy and slightly reflective, catching the amber light of the lantern pods and returning it as a soft gleam. The edges of their leaves have dried slightly in the day's warmth, curling just perceptibly inward, a sign that they are ready for the evening mist. You raise the copper can and tilt it gently over the nearest fern. The mist comes out in a fine spray, almost more vapor than water, and it settles across the broad leaves in a way that is very satisfying to watch. Each droplet catches the amber light as it falls, so that for a moment there is a small constellation of tiny bright points above the leaf, and then they land, and the leaf darkens slightly with moisture and begins, very gradually, very quietly, to uncurl. The edges ease outward, the surface smooths, and from somewhere deep within the plant, from somewhere in the tissue of the stem or the root, or the heart of it, a low vibration begins. Not a sound you can name, just a presence, a warmth in the chest, a sense that something has been added to the air. You move along the railing, misting each fern in turn. There are 7 of them on this side of the platform, each in its own shallow clay dish, each with its own particular character. The second one has a leaf that grew at an unusual angle, tilted toward the northeast, always, as if listening for something in that direction. The fourth one is the largest, its leaves overlapping the edge of its dish and trailing slightly over the railing, reaching toward the open air. The sixth one is the newest, only 3 seasons old, its leaves still slightly paler than the others, still finding its voice. You mist each one slowly, giving each one time. The mist settles. The vibration deepens. The fragrance thickens around you. When you have finished with the ferns, you move to the hanging baskets. These require a different technique, not a direct spray, which would be too forceful for the delicate structure of their leaves, but a very gentle misting from below, letting the vapor drift upward and settle on the undersides of the leaves where they are most porous. You tilt the can almost horizontal and hold it just beneath each basket, letting the mist rise. The baskets sway very slightly with the movement of air you create. The plants inside them, small, star-shaped things with pale silver-green leaves, catch the vapor and hold it, tiny drops forming at the tips of their pointed leaves and hanging there like ornaments. The smell in the fragrance garden is very strong now. The distant rain smell, the stone smell, the cedar from the walkways threading through everything. You stand in the center of the platform and breathe it in slowly, completely, letting it fill you from the bottom of your lungs to the top. You hold it and release. The low hum of the sound tree moves through the decking beneath your feet, always present, always the same, that one low note that has not changed in all the time anyone can remember. It is, you have often thought, not a sound so much as a ground, the way the ground beneath a forest is the ground of everything that grows there, present in everything without announcing itself. You feel it in your feet, in your ankles, moving up through you like warmth. You stay in the fragrance garden for a while longer. There is no particular reason to hurry, and the smell is very good tonight, very full, as if the plants have had an especially productive day. You check the soil in each of the clay dishes, running your finger along the surface, feeling for moisture, for the right texture. Most of them are fine. One, the fourth fern, the large one, needs a little more in its dish, and you fill it slowly, watching the water darken the pale clay, watching it be absorbed. Then you straighten and you look out over the railing at the forest. The upper canopy stretches away in every direction, a vast, dark, living surface, lit here and there by clusters of lantern pods strung between branches, by the occasional pale glow of a plant whose bioluminescence runs naturally in its tissue. The light is amber and green, and occasionally a very pale blue where certain mosses have taken hold on the highest branches. It is beautiful in the way that things are beautiful when they have not been arranged, when they have simply grown over time into their own particular form. And moving across this surface, very slowly, very gently, is the wind. You can see it before you feel it, a long, slow ripple moving through the topmost leaves, a darkening and lightening, a breathing. And then it reaches you, and you feel it on your face, cool and clean and carrying the smell of somewhere distant, somewhere the forest goes when it has gone further than you can follow. You close your eyes, you let it pass across you. The walkway to your right sways gently. The hanging baskets turn. The hum deepens for just a moment, as if the sound tree has breathed in, and then it returns to its steady, constant note. You pick up your copper can and move on. The second walkway runs east from the fragrance garden, and it is longer than the first, perhaps 50 steps, with a slight curve to it that means you lose sight of the fragrance garden before you have arrived at the next platform. For a little while, you are simply on the walkway, between places, moving through the amber-lit air with the canopy above and the deep darkness below, and nothing in particular to attend to except the walk itself. This is, you have always felt, the best part of the evening round, the in-between. The walking from one place to the next with the hum in the soles of your feet and the cedar smell in your nose and the walkway swaying very gently beneath you, a rhythm that is almost like being carried. You notice the ropes on either side as your hand trails along them. The fiber is thick and slightly rough, not unpleasantly so, but textured, the kind of surface that gives the hand something to feel, something to know it is there. And the lichens on the rope are very soft where you touch them, like something between moss and velvet, cool and slightly damp with the evening's gathering moisture. Ahead, the next platform begins to resolve itself out of the amber light. The bell moss platform is the quietest sounding place in the canopy, which is to say it is the loudest, because the bell moss makes more sound than any other plant here, though loudest is entirely the wrong word for what it does. What it does is tick. A soft, regular, organic ticking, the sound of small structures cooling, small membranes contracting as the temperature drops with the evening, like the sound of a house settling at night, like the sound of embers in a fire that has been banked and is slowly releasing its heat. The platform is long and narrow, more of a shelf than a proper deck, running along the eastern side of a very large branch, a branch so old and so thick that it has become almost a surface in itself, its bark worn smooth by decades of foot traffic, its upper side nearly flat. The bell moss pots are arranged along this natural shelf in a long row, perhaps 30 pots, each one a slightly different shade of terracotta, each one holding a dense, cushioned growth of moss that is darker than ordinary moss, almost charcoal green, with tiny bell-shaped structures rising from it on threads so fine they are barely visible. It is these bells that tick. When the temperature changes, even fractionally, even by the small amount that comes with the passing of a cloud or the turning of the air, the bells contract or expand, and in doing so, they tap against each other, very softly, very regularly, a patient, unhurried rhythm that has nothing to do with time as you usually measure it. You step onto the shelf platform and the ticking rises around you like something rising from the bottom of a very still pool. It is everywhere and it is gentle and it is, you have always found this, deeply, profoundly calming. There is something about a sound that has a pattern but no urgency, a rhythm but no tempo, that tells the body it is safe to stop monitoring, that nothing is building toward anything, that this is simply what is happening and it will keep happening, and there is nothing required of you in response. You set the copper can down on the shelf beside the first pot and begin your work. The bell moss pots need to be rotated, turned a quarter turn each evening so that the growth stays even, so that all sides of the moss have equal access to the cooling air. It is simple work. You pick up the first pot. It is heavier than it looks, the clay thick, the moss dense, and you turn it, feeling the rough texture of the terracotta against your palms. You set it back. You move to the second. Each pot has its own character, the way all living things have their own character when you have spent enough time with them. The third pot holds the oldest moss, It has grown so dense that it has begun to overflow its edges, sending exploratory tendrils down the outside of the clay in a slow cascade that will, in time, reach the shelf itself. The seventh pot is the smallest, a recent addition, its bells still very tiny. You have to lean close to hear them, and when you do, you catch the faint mineral taste of altitude on your lips, the cool sharpness of the high air. The 15th pot is the one you are most fond of. You would not admit this to anyone because it is the kind of fondness that is slightly absurd, the kind you feel for a particular corner of a room or a particular hour of the afternoon, but it is the pot whose bells make the most complex sound. Not louder, not faster, but more layered, as if the moss within it has arranged its bells at slightly different heights, so that when they tick in a small cascade, one just after the next, so close together that the ear almost hears them as a chord rather than a sequence. You rotate the 15th pot and pause to listen. The ticking of all the bells together fills the shelf platform with a soft, complex rhythm, a sound like the inside of a clock, but alive, but growing, but made of something that chose to be this way. The hum of the sound tree moves beneath it, steady and low, the ground beneath the rhythm. The amber light of the lantern pods pools along the shelf, catching the moisture on the moss and returning it as tiny gleams. You pick up the copper can and miss the bell moss, not heavily, just a fine vapor, just enough to keep the bells from drying, just enough to keep the membrane supple and responsive. The mist settles into the dark green cushions and disappears almost immediately, absorbed. The ticking quickens very slightly for a moment, a small, pleased acceleration, and then settles back to its patient rhythm. You work your way along the row, rotating and misting, rotating and misting. The shelf extends far enough that by the time you reach the last pot, the first is already behind you, already ticking its way into the evening. You have done this so many times that the work is almost not work. It is more like a conversation or a greeting, or the kind of attention you give a place you love simply by being in it and noticing. When you have finished, you stand at the far end of the shelf platform and look back along the row. 30 pots, 30 different shades of terracotta in the amber light, 30 cushions of dark moss, each one ticking in its own quiet voice. Together they make a sound that is almost music, not quite, never quite, because music implies intention, and these bells have no intention. They simply respond to the world as it changes around them, but something very close to music, something that works the same way music works on the body, something that slows the breath. You breathe in the cedar and the moss and the faint mineral altitude. You feel the hum in your feet. You stand there for a moment longer than you need to, and then you move on. There is a platform between the bell moss shelf and the propagation greenhouse that you have never quite found a name for, and so you simply call it the middle platform, though this is not accurate because it is not the middle of anything in particular. It is a small square deck, barely 6 paces across, that sits at the junction of 3 walkways. It is a place for pausing, a place for looking. You stop here as you always do. From the middle platform, you can see further into the canopy than from anywhere else in the network. The 3 walkways radiate outward like the arms of a letter, and along each one, at varying distances, the amber glow of other platforms is visible through the branches. To the south, the faint blue-green of the propagation greenhouse's lanterns. To the east, the deeper amber of the great tree platform, the one that holds the sound tree itself. And to the west, where you have come from, the warm glow of the fragrance garden and the bell moss shelf together, their light combining into something very close to the color of late afternoon, even now, even as the evening deepens. The wind moves through the upper canopy again, that long, slow exhalation. You feel it across your face and hands. The walkways sway. The ropes creak their familiar low note. The lantern pods along the railings pulse very slightly in the movement of air, as if breathing. You tilt your head back and look up. Above the canopy network, the sky is the color of deep water, a blue so dark it is almost nothing, almost the absence of color, but not quite. Not quite nothing. There are stars beginning to appear, not many yet, just the first and brightest, the ones that do not need the full dark to be seen. They are very still. They do not flicker or move. They are simply there, as they have always been, as they will continue to be, entirely indifferent to the question of whether anyone is looking. You lower your gaze. The hum of the sound tree is very clear from here, perhaps because the middle platform is equidistant from several things and so none of them dominates, or perhaps because the silence between the bell moss and the propagation house creates a kind of acoustic clearing in which the tree's note can be heard without obstruction. Whatever the reason, you are always most aware of the hum here. It is low and steady and warm in the way that a color can be warm, not because it contains heat, but because it produces a feeling in you that is related to warmth. A sense of continuity, a sense that something has been holding this note for a very long time and will continue to hold it, and that this is, in itself, a kind of reassurance. You stay on the middle platform until the wind passes, until the walkways stop swaying, until the last of the movement has settled and the canopy is still again, or as still as living things are ever still, which is not very still, but still enough. Then you take the walkway south toward the propagation greenhouse. The propagation greenhouse is not a greenhouse in the usual sense. There is no glass, no sealed structure, no attempt to trap heat or exclude the weather. It is simply a platform with a roof, a canopy of tightly woven branches above, dense enough to diffuse the rain and moderate the temperature, open at the sides to the free movement of air. The roof has been there long enough that things have begun to grow on it, mosses and small ferns and occasional flowering things whose seeds arrived on the wind and found, in the woven branches, a surface they could use. So the roof of the propagation greenhouse is itself a small garden, a secondary growth, a life that came of its own accord and was allowed to stay. Inside, under the woven roof, on long narrow shelves of smooth wood, are the seedlings. They are small, very small, many of them, barely more than 2 leaves and a stem, the first tentative articulations of plants that will, in time, grow into the broad-leafed ferns and the dense bell mosses and the column-shaped forms that line the other platforms. At this stage, they are fragile and they are ordinary-looking, no particular color, no particular smell, no particular sound. But they are already, if you listen very carefully, already beginning to tick. That is the sound of the propagation house, a very fine, very soft ticking, like the sound of cooling embers in a fire that has been banked for the night. The seedling cells are dividing, expanding, contracting as the temperature changes with the evening. They are learning to respond to the world. They are learning what the world feels like. You enter the propagation house and the smell changes. Here the moss smell is stronger, concentrated, because there are so many small plants in a small space, all of them breathing and releasing and absorbing. The cedar smell is fainter here because the roof blocks the direct movement of air that carries it from the walkway planks. Instead, there is something earthier, something more fundamental, the smell of roots and soil and the beginning of things. The lantern pods here are smaller than elsewhere. The propagation house has dozens of tiny ones, no bigger than a thumb joint, clustered in groups along the shelf supports and along the woven branches of the roof. They give a softer, more diffuse light than the larger pods, a light that seems to come from everywhere at once with no particular source, a light that is more like a quality of the air than a product of individual sources. In this light, the seedlings cast no shadows. They simply exist in a gentle, even amber, each one distinct, each one quiet. You begin to check them. This is more careful work than the misting and the rotating. It requires looking closely, bending low, using your fingers to feel the moisture of the soil, to check the tension of a stem, to note which seedlings have put out a new leaf since yesterday and which have been still. You move along the shelves slowly, giving each one a moment of your attention. Most are fine. Most are simply doing what seedlings do, growing at a pace that is invisible to any single moment of observation, growing in the way that all deep and lasting things grow, which is to say, continuously, quietly, without announcement. There are 2 shelves of the smallest seedlings, the ones that have only just germinated, that are in the first week of their lives above the soil. These ones you do not touch, you simply look. You look at each tiny pair of leaves, each thread of stem, each small circle of dark soil in its small clay pot, and you note that they are here, that they are continuing, that the process that began when you set the seeds is proceeding according to its own unhurried logic. There is a particular seedling at the end of the second shelf that has been slow, slower than the others of its cohort, slower than you expected based on the parent plant it came from. You have been watching it for 3 weeks now. It is not failing. It is simply taking its time, doing things in its own order, according to its own schedule, and you have learned over many years of this work to find this quality more interesting than concerning. The slow ones, when they finally come into their own, are often the most complex. The ones whose growth cannot be hurried are often the ones whose sound, when it finally emerges, is the richest. You look at the slow seedling for a moment. Its 2 leaves are very green, a deep saturated green, as if it has been putting everything into the color rather than the growth. You give it a small misting. The water settles on its leaves and gleams in the lantern pod light. You straighten. The propagation house is full of the fine ticking of small lives. It is, you have always thought, the most hopeful sound in the canopy, not because of anything it promises, but because of what it simply is, the sound of things that are alive, in the process of becoming, unhurried and untroubled and entirely absorbed in the work of their own existence. You stand in the amber light and listen to them for a while. The hum of the sound tree comes through the floor, through the shelf supports, through the very soil in the clay pots. The seedlings are hearing it in whatever way they hear, absorbing it through their roots, through the tissue of their forming leaves, learning it, growing alongside it. One day they will hum it themselves. One day they will be part of the canopy's voice. But that is a long time from now, and there is no hurry, and tonight they are simply small and ticking and alive. You leave the propagation house softly, the way you always leave it. The eastern walkway is the longest. It runs from the junction near the middle platform all the way to the great tree, the one that holds the sound tree, the one from which the whole canopy's hum originates. It is perhaps 100 steps, though you have never counted, and it is the oldest walkway in the network. The planks here are more deeply worn, the grain more pronounced, the wood darker with age and moisture, and the particular patina that comes from many years of contact with human hands and feet. Some of the planks have been replaced over the years. You can see them, the newer wood slightly lighter, slightly less weathered, but most are original, and they carry the weight of that in the way that old things do, which is not heavily, but deeply. The ropes on this walkway are the thickest in the network. They are as thick as your wrist, braided from a fiber that you have been told comes from a plant that no longer grows in this part of the forest, a plant that was cultivated here once, long ago, and whose descendants you have never been able to identify among the current growth. The ropes are so old that they have darkened to the color of charcoal, and they feel, when you run your hand along them, more like stone than like fiber, smooth and slightly cold, denser than you expect. You walk slowly. The eastern walkway has a gentle slope to it, not enough to be difficult, but enough to be perceptible, a slight inclination that means you are walking fractionally upward toward the sound tree, toward the oldest part of the network. You feel it in your calves. A small, steady effort, not unpleasant. On either side, the branches of the surrounding trees grow close to the walkway, close enough that you could reach out and touch the leaves if you wanted to. And sometimes you do. Tonight you do. Your free hand trails out to the right as you walk, and your fingers brush a cluster of large, smooth leaves whose surfaces are cool and slightly waxy, and give under the touch just slightly, the way a thing gives when it is full of water and life. The leaf springs back after your hand has passed. It does not mind. The hum is getting louder. Not dramatically. There is no moment of sudden increase, no threshold you cross. It is simply that with each step, the note becomes slightly more present, slightly more filling, the way a smell becomes more present as you approach its source. It is moving up through the walkway now, through the thick old ropes, through the air around you. It is in your chest, not as a vibration you feel with your body exactly, but as a fullness, a resonance, a sense that the space inside you is not empty, but occupied by this sound that is also a ground. You can see the great tree now. It is not the largest tree you have ever seen, though it is very large, but it has a quality that goes beyond size. It is old in a way that reads as presence. Its trunk is wide enough that 3 people with outstretched arms could not encircle it, and its bark has the texture of something that has been through every kind of weather and has simply continued. The bark is deeply furrowed, dark brown and gray, and in the furrows, various small organisms have made their homes, mosses and lichens and small ferns, a whole community of quiet life living in the crevices of the tree's surface. The outer branches are so wide that several walkways have been threaded through them, and it is these branches, the outer ones, that hum. The hum of the sound tree, you have come to understand over many years of listening, is not produced by the tree in the way that a voice produces sound. It is produced by the tree in the way that a room produces warmth, as a consequence of what the tree is, not what it is trying to do. The tree has been absorbing sound for so long, from so many sources, that it has become saturated with it. And sound, in this kind of plant, cannot be held indefinitely. It seeps out, slowly and continuously, through the wood of the branches and the bark of the trunk, through the very grain of the thing. And the note it releases is the sum of everything it has ever heard, processed through centuries of the tree's own chemistry, distilled into a single frequency. One low note, always the same, the average of everything. The platform around the great tree is the largest in the network, a broad, irregular deck that follows the shape of the tree's base, with gaps in the planking where the great roots emerge and where smaller plants have been allowed to grow through. It is less tidy than the other platforms. There is more life here, more organic complexity, more of the sense that the human-made and the tree-made have been in conversation for so long that the distinction has become unclear. Mosses grow in the corners of the decking. A species of small vine has wound itself around two of the railing posts and has been there long enough that the wood has grown slightly around it. The lantern pods here are the oldest, and their light is the deepest amber, almost orange, almost the color of firelight, warm and low and ancient feeling. You cross the platform to the base of the great tree and place your hand on the bark. The hum moves into your palm, up your arm, through your shoulder, into your chest, where it joins whatever is already there and settles. It is warm. The bark itself is warm, warmer than the air, warmer than the wood of the walkways, as if the tree is generating its own heat from the inside, which perhaps it is, which perhaps is simply what it means to be full of sound that has never stopped. You stand with your hand on the tree for a long time. There is nothing to do here. There is no misting required. The great tree is beyond the need for any intervention you could make. There is no rotating of pots, no checking of soil. You come here at the end of your round simply to be here. Simply to place your hand on the bark and feel the hum and be for a few minutes in the presence of something that has been here longer than you have and will be here long after. The wind moves through the upper canopy again. You hear it before you feel it, a long, soft rushing in the highest branches, moving toward you from the west. And then it reaches the great tree platform, and you feel it across your face, cool and clean and carrying the smell of the whole forest, the cedar and the moss and the altitude, all of it at once. The lantern pods sway, the walkways creak. The hum deepens for a moment, as if the tree has drawn the wind into itself, absorbed it, made it part of the note. And then the wind passes and the hum returns to its constant pitch, and everything is still again. You lower your hand from the tree. You look up at the great branches overhead, at the small communities of life in every fork and cranny, at the lantern pods strung along the outer branches like a slow constellation. You look at the platform around you, the irregular planking, the mosses in the corners, the vine on the railing post, the gaps where the roots emerge. And you look at the three walkways radiating outward from this platform, each one leading somewhere in the network, each one carrying the hum in its wood and its ropes. You pick up your copper can. It is lighter now. Most of the water has been used. You can hear the small amount remaining when you tilt it, a thin sound, a sound of almost empty. You begin to walk back. The return walk is different from the outward walk in a way that is hard to articulate but easy to feel. On the way out, you are moving toward things, toward the next platform, the next plant, the next small task. On the way back, you are simply moving. The work is done, or nearly done, and the body knows this, and begins to slow in a way that is not fatigue, but something more like completion, the easing of a held breath, the settling of attention back into the body from the world it has been attending to. You take the long way back, not the most direct route through the junction, but a longer circuit that takes you along a peripheral walkway you don't often use, one that runs close to the outer edge of the Canopy network and offers a view of the forest stretching away to the north. This walkway is narrower than the others, and its sway is more pronounced. The ropes thinner, the anchor points further apart, so that each step produces a small pendulum arc that is very noticeable and very pleasant. You walk slowly. Your hand trails along the rope on your left. The amber light from the nearby lantern pods is just enough to see by. To the north, the forest is very dark. The lantern pods of the Canopy network do not extend this far, and the bioluminescent mosses on the outer branches give only the faintest suggestion of light, a pale, barely visible blue-green that traces the shapes of the nearest branches without illuminating them. Below, the forest floor is entirely invisible. It is simply darkness and the sound of things growing and the hum of the great tree traveling through the wood beneath your feet. You stop walking for a moment. You listen. The bell moss, far behind you now, is just audible, the finest thread of ticking, like a sound remembered rather than heard. The fragrance garden scent is still present in the air, faint and complex, the distant rain smell and the stone smell and the altitude beneath them both. The hum of the sound tree is everywhere and nowhere, in the walkway and in the ropes and in the air and in your chest. The wind is still for a moment, a genuine stillness, a pause in the exhale of the forest, a held breath between one movement and the next. And in that stillness, you hear something you only ever hear when everything else has quieted enough. The sound of the propagation house's seedlings carried on the cool air, very faint, very fine, a ticking so soft it is more like a sensation than a sound. Like the feeling of almost sleep when the body begins to let go and the mind is still just present enough to notice. You breathe in, you breathe out. The wind returns, gentle and long, and you continue your walk. The Hammock Alcove is the last stop on the evening round, and it is not, strictly speaking, a stop at all. It is a destination. It is tucked into the curve of a large branch, not a separate platform, but a widening of the walkway into a broad, sheltered space, half enclosed by the branch above and the growth of old vines along the railing. The vines have been there long enough that they have woven themselves into a kind of wall, not opaque, but filtering, so that the amber light from the lantern pods comes through them in irregular patterns, shifting slightly when the air moves. The effect is something like being inside and outside at the same time, sheltered but open, enclosed but not confined. The hammock itself is old. It is made of a woven fabric that has faded from whatever color it once was to a soft, warm gray, the gray of driftwood, the gray of old linen, a gray that is so thoroughly itself that it no longer seems like a faded color, but like the color it was always meant to be. It is strung between two posts that are set into the widened walkway, and it has been there long enough that the posts have settled into their positions absolutely. No give, no wobble, no adjustment needed. The hammock hangs in a gentle curve, its ends at shoulder height, its lowest point at the level of your knees. You hang the copper can on its hook at the entrance to the alcove. You slip off your shoes and set them beside it. The decking of the alcove is smooth here, smoother than anywhere else in the network, worn by years of bare feet, by years of this same ritual at the end of the same round. It is warm under your feet, warmer than the surrounding walkway, warmer than the air. You lower yourself into the hammock. It is, every time, a small act of trust, the moment of commitment when your weight transfers from your feet to the fabric, when you are no longer standing on something solid but held by something woven, something that gives. The hammock accepts your weight gradually, the fabric spreading and adjusting, finding the shape of you, accommodating you the way a thing accommodates when it knows how to. You sink into it. Your back finds the curve. Your legs extend. Your arms settle at your sides. The hammock sways very slightly with the settling of your weight, a small, slow arc, back and forth, diminishing. Back and forth, back and forth. And then it is still, or nearly still, the small residual movement so slight that it is more like breathing than like swinging. You look up through the gap in the vine wall above you. The great branch curves overhead, its bark dark and furrowed, a small community of moss and lichen along its upper surface visible as a pale green line against the deep blue of the sky. The stars that were beginning to appear earlier are more numerous now. More of the sky has darkened, more of the lesser lights have become visible. They are still and cold and very far away. They are very beautiful. The hum of the sound tree reaches you here as it reaches you everywhere, through the posts of the hammock, through the fabric beneath you, through the air. It is, from the hammock, less like a sound than like a quality of rest, something the body recognizes as safe, as held, as part of a continuity that extends in every direction. You feel it in the length of your spine, in the back of your skull, in the slow, easy movement of your ribs as you breathe. The bell moss ticks far away. The fragrance garden breathes its distant rain smell into the evening air, and a thread of it reaches you even here, even now, faint but present. The cedar of the warm planks, the moss, the mineral taste of altitude on the back of your tongue. You close your eyes. There is a ritual to the last part of the evening that you have not planned, but that has assembled itself over time, the way rituals do, not designed but arrived at through repetition, through the gradual discovery of what works. You lie in the hammock and you let the canopy speak to you. That is all. You simply lie here and listen to what is already happening, what has been happening all along, what will continue to happen when you are asleep and when you wake and through every interval between. The sound tree hums. It has been humming for longer than anyone can remember. It was humming before you came here. It will hum long after. It holds its single note with a patience that is not the patience of effort, of something waiting to stop, but the patience of nature, which is simply continuity, simply the persistence of a process that has no reason to end. You breathe with it, in and out. The bell moss ticks in its soft, unhurried way, and you feel it more than hear it, a rhythm so faint at this distance that it has become less like a sound and more like a sense of time passing quietly, without urgency, each moment succeeding the last in the way that all moments do. The lantern pods along the vine wall of the alcove are dimming. They dim every evening, gradually over the course of an hour or so, responding to the decreasing ambient light and sound in the canopy. As the forest quiets, as the last birds settle, as the wind diminishes, the pods absorb less and emit less, and the amber light they give becomes slowly, incrementally softer. It is a process you have watched many times. It is always peaceful. It is always like watching something very large and very unhurried breathe out for the last time before sleep. The light is dimmer now than it was when you entered the alcove. You can see it through your closed eyes. The warm amber has become something softer, something closer to rust, something that is almost not light at all, but simply the memory of light. The hammock holds you. The branch above you holds the hammock. The great tree holds the branch. The forest holds the tree, and beneath the forest the earth, steady and enormous and entirely reliable, holding all of it, holding everything, the way it has always held everything, the way it will always hold everything. You breathe in the smell of cedar, the smell of moss, the distant rain. You breathe out. In the propagation house, the seedlings are ticking their way through the night, growing without knowing they are growing, becoming, cell by cell, what they will eventually be. In the fragrance garden, the broad-leafed ferns have released everything they gathered today, all of it now in the air, the distant rain smell, the stone smell, drifting slowly through the canopy and settling on leaves and bark and rope and the warm wood of old walkways. On the bell moss shelf, the 30 clay pots tick in their patient chorus, each bell a tiny voice, all of them together a sound like the canopy breathing. And at the center of everything, the sound tree hums its one note, the note that has not changed, the note that is the sum of everything heard and processed and transformed, the note that is in the wood of the walkways and the fiber of the ropes and the air and the hammock and the fabric beneath you and the soles of your feet and the back of your skull and the slow movement of your chest as you breathe. You are very comfortable. Your body is very heavy in the hammock. Not the heaviness of effort, not the heaviness of strain, the heaviness of completion, of a body that has moved through its evening and arrived at its rest and is now, without ceremony, without urgency, beginning to let go. Your hands are open, your face is soft, your breathing has slowed. You notice this without trying to change it, without trying to make it slower still. It has found its own pace, the way the bell moss found its own pace, the way the seedlings are growing at their own pace. Everything at its own pace, nothing hurried. The amber light through the vine wall is very faint now. The lantern pods are almost done. Just a warmth, just a suggestion. The hum of the sound tree fills the space where the light was, low and steady, always the same, always there. The walkways are still. The wind has gone to sleep in the upper branches. The forest is breathing very slowly. You are in the hammock. You are in the canopy. You are very high above the ground, held by old rope and warm wood and the steady hum of something that has been here longer than memory. There is nothing you need to do. There is nowhere you need to go. The bell moss ticks, very softly, very far away. Cedar, moss, rain, the hum, the slow sway of the hammock, just a little, just enough, back and forward. The amber light is almost nothing now, a warmth, just a warmth. The sound tree holds its note, the note holds you, breathing in, breathing out. The canopy is very quiet, the canopy is very still, the canopy is breathing itself, slowly, into silence, and you are here, and you are held, and the hum is all around you, and the night is very gentle, and there is nothing at all to do, nothing at all. The bell moss, just ticking, cedar, the hum. Somewhere below, very far below, the forest floor is dark and quiet and full of the slow work of roots. Somewhere above, the stars are still and cold and very far away and entirely indifferent and entirely beautiful. And here, between the roots and the stars, the canopy holds its breath. The lantern pods are dark. The hum, just the hum, and you are asleep.